Exit algorithms. Scale smarter. Sell stronger.
Welcome to Exit Algorithms, the podcast where we decode what it really takes to unlock growth, streamline operations, and prepare your business for a high-value exit. I'm your host, Pete Vera, and today I'm joined by Diana Vainberga. She spent nearly a decade in PwC's deals practice across the UK and Germany, rising to director. She also speaks 5 languages, giving her a truly international lens on cross-border deals. Today, she's a partner at DevelopX, where she leads transaction advisory and data-driven value creation for private equity. Diana, great to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Pete. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. Do you mind starting off? Can you share a bit about your background and maybe your business journey, how you ended up at DevelopX?
I'm a partner at DevelopX since about a year now. And before that, I spent over 10 years helping founders, investors, corporates navigate the M&A journey. And basically from preparing the business for the exit to the actual processes and then the value creation side on the buy side of things as well. I've spent majority of my business life in London, so helping there the larger private equities, buying businesses, helping them with the growth journey, and then with the exits. And more recently, which is already not that recent because it's already 5 years, I've been in Germany, mostly focusing on the mid-market private equity. And the last years, I primarily supported business owners, founders in their sell process, and preparing them for the exit journey.
What is your main role there?
So we help basically investors and founders throughout the whole deal cycle. So from basically buying the business, we help them there with the M&A buy and build strategy, for instance, to then the diligence phase, mostly focusing around commercial DD, technical DD, and AI DD. And then after the purchase, we help them with the growth journey. So starting with the full potential plan, more often than not, we are doing AI potential plan nowadays, and then scoping the initiatives that would mostly contribute to growth and to a kind of EBITDA upside, and then going into the execution. So that combination of kind of entrepreneurship, execution, and network is, I think, where if we combine it, we add the most value to the founders that are trying to position their business for a sale process.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. Huge value add for businesses. Yeah, what type of businesses do you look for, or what are some of the things you like to see in a ideal target that you'd invest with?
So we usually work for investors or private equities that are investing in those targets. So when they're looking at targets, what we see nowadays, it's more and more. So I do a lot of software or software related businesses. So whether it's technology, so software as a technology business, so like a SaaS, or if it's a medtech business or a defense tech business, for instance, it's usually a couple of things, right? So number one, it's of course you look at the people, right? So in the end, you're buying the business, and you would like to get to know the CEOs and understand what's their background, where they're coming from, and whether you think that the story that they will tell you will hold to what they're telling you, right? So I think it's in the end, for me, M&A business is the people business. So that's what investors look at, I think, first, right? But going beyond that, assuming that's a check. The second thing is nowadays, of course, the degree of the business model being disrupted by, so I think it's a no secret, AI is everywhere. But what is more and more important is not purely, will the business able to kind of scale, but more, is it able to sustain and not being obsolete in a couple of years' time, right? So more and more we're doing as part of commercial DD or a technical DD or kind of a combination of both, really that AI angle to understand on the one hand side, what is the upside of AI, where can it create value, right? So that's the kind of growth side of the story, because depending on that, you can kind of quadruple your revenue. And then there's also the downside of it. So the downside is basically the disruption point that I mentioned. Is this business model sustainable, or is there a risk? And if there is a risk, where's the risk? And I think what buyers or our clients that we work with mostly kind of find, I think, is beyond those kind of two buckets where I said that one is the upside, the other one is the downside. I think they're looking beyond just labels, right? So I think there's a huge point around labeling things as AI and actually having substance to it. So I would say beyond this initial downside, upside potential, we then go and try and help them understand, okay, is it purely kind of a label, or is it like, what I mean by label is, for instance, if someone is using like a chatbot or a ChatGPT or Claude, that doesn't mean that this business is kind of set for the future, right? It just means that it's covering the basics. Or is it really like, is there substance beyond that AI label? So that would mean, are those architectures set up for AI agents, for instance, right? So is IT landscape set up in a way where you can have AI agents on top of it, and it will kind of give you interesting insights, or not even interesting, like helpful and correct insights. And the second bit of that same problem around labeling versus actually having it, even if there is substance behind AI, sometimes it's around the data, right? So the actual point if you look at AI, is the data landscape actually and the quality of the data in a good form? Because no matter what AI you will use, it will produce incorrect results if the data is not sound and if it's not basically, if it has not been maintained to a good enough standard. So I think that's another thing. And maybe two more points and then I stop talking. So one, the team capabilities. So the team capabilities in a way that can those teams actually execute on some of the top line or initiatives that have been, for instance, identified as potential value levers, yes or no? Do they have the skills? Have they been trained? Are there like some maybe data scientists on board of that company that can help that can help on that AI journey to the whole team? And so the kind of team setup. And then the third thing is probably, which I kind of mentioned, but maybe not clear enough, is the technical depth, which is a little bit different from like just good data. It's more around how is the whole setup of IT infrastructure been to date, right? Have there been some fast tracks which basically need to be completely replaced before you start with adding agents and AI on top of it? I guess a lot of points to that AI point, right? So I think so the first point, the people, the AI. And the third point is, of course, the market potential, right? And how well the kind of equity story of the founders, for instance, fits the market potential, right? Are they capturing all the risks? Are they capturing all the opportunities in a way that is kind of sound if you look at their business plan, right? Kind of, are there any risks beyond pure AI, right? We have a lot of geopolitical things going on that may limit some cross-border topics, of course, and on a local level, same, right? Some of the external factors need to be considered. So I think this is also a consideration. Of course, it has always been a consideration, but I think now, as the world became more and more kind of interconnected, there have been some various political topics that I don't need to elaborate further, but I think all of that is quite recent, and therefore I think a full understanding of how could this impact the equity story, I think is very important, because if not, then what we also see sometimes, there's a crazy focus on the AI topic, and then sometimes people forget the other topics while they still exist, and they may still also be as important as the kind of new technology that is rising.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you see most often kills a deal, during due diligence and the transactions you work on? Are there some commonalities, common things that you see the deal go south?
The exit timelines have been postponed. I would say that, right? Like because of the macro environment that wasn't quite certain. A lot of kind of businesses kind of weren't sure if it's the right time to enter the market. So, and then the buyers, again, weren't sure how to price those things, right? So what we've seen most is like processes being very, very either extended or, just not yet entered, which kind of course, results in a certain scenario where the investors have funds but can't deploy them quick enough, which again is not great for the cycle. And in terms of killing, like AI has been definitely something where there have been a number of, I would say, kill scenarios in the past year or so, where the technology made some businesses obsolete, basically. And we kind of. Someone wouldn't have thought about that 12 months before, but then, there was hesitation, then process extended, and then eventually the AI that killed the USP kind of entered. And I think that's probably the most frequent scenario.
Do you have any advice for companies who want to maximize their value when they decide to partner with a PE group? How does a business best prepare for a sale?
How does a business best prepare for a sale? I think I would say start early. I think that's one of the key topics that we keep seeing just going wrong. That the founders start preparing like a few months before, it should go into the process. The reason for that is that in order to get the best kind of equity story, or not the best, the most succinct and transparent equity story, you need to get your data straight. And where we see a lot of topics are happening is that the data is not, that goes into the data room is not good. So it lacks granularity. So it doesn't give the full view of the business. Like some of the customer product economics are not there just because the data on that lower level is not good enough to put into the data room, right? And it, of course, discounts your value of the company if you can't communicate what are the drivers in a kind of data-driven fashion. So I think a lot of the things we do around that data-driven value creation, or the reverse scenario where you prepare companies for exit, is actually try, and if you can, start very, very early with data preparation, meaning understand what story you want to tell first, do a storyline for that, and then see how you can underpin that story by data. And then we go and try and understand what are the different sources of the data, what are the KPIs that are needed to tell the story. And then in most cases, we kind of create a data cube out of multiple sources that would form the basis for then basically creating analysis and to tell the narrative. So that's, basically start early and get your data right? And sometimes if you haven't been tracking some KPIs, you may as well still have time to do some of that work, right? Because if some KPIs are important, for instance, we see that sometimes in the online or the digital business landscape, right? Where you can easily track some of your e-commerce KPI and those KPIs that are kind of where you need some processes basically. And you can still start tracking them, right? A couple of years before the exit. You can't do that right before you want to do the transaction, right? And so, I think early, then do the data right. And then also think about how you want to position yourselves for the future. What I also saw a lot of times now, many founders have interesting ideas to some of the use cases they want to push, where the growth comes from. But sometimes it's too many, right? It's also about kind of making the equity story concrete and trying to bring it to kind of a focus in a way, because at least true for some of the software cases, right? there's so much out there currently, so much so much can be created with purely some tools that, you don't need actually engineering capabilities for some of the topics. So there it helps to be very specific about what are the use cases you want to put as your key kind of equity story anchors in a way, because then making sure that those anchors are not going to be disrupted by AI, etc. Sometimes make the story easier to digest, even though you might want to do it in other use cases, but maybe, select those that are kind of critical to your business plan, critical to your equity story. And then it basically becomes a more succinct story in a way. So yes, so I would say focus is the third kind of point and that I would say would be needed.
Yeah, really useful. Thank you. Yeah, and we touched on it quite a bit already with AI. You mentioned AI due diligence, AI labeling versus actually using it. I'm curious, how are you leveraging AI today most, and how do you see it affecting your industry? Yeah, well said. I love that. A lot of good takeaways there. Yeah, and you mentioned this a few times, but I'd love to, if you could elaborate a little more on data-driven value creation. What does that look like practically speaking in a business that you work with?
Sure. I mean, data-driven value creation. So we have two sides where we help businesses, right? So the one is exit readiness, where we already discussed briefly, right? And the value creation is kind of the reverse side of it. So the value creation is when an investor buys the business, what are the key steps he or she needs to do in order to grow the business, right? So where we start, usually we try to come in as soon as possible as the business is being bought by a private equity investor, for instance. And the first step where we help is actually set the transparency for the performance, right? So what we do is usually kind of a reporting work stream where we work out with the management and the new investor what are the key KPIs that actually need tracking, because sometimes they have KPIs. It's not a lack of reporting. It's a lack of the right reporting that we usually find. So we help them shape the actual tracking mechanism in the form of trying to understand what success looks like and by what can you measure it. And so when we have that, and usually this is where it goes wrong, not wrong, but where we see a lot of topics that there is some reporting, but the reporting is actually not fit for purpose, right? So the KPIs that have been selected are not fit for purpose. So we redefine them. And then the next step is actually then trying to see, okay, now we redefine those KPIs. Do we actually have the data for it? And that's the second showstopper where we usually see, okay, the KPIs have been defined, but then we're missing data to actually execute on those KPIs, right? So we either need to bring certain data sources together, because in order to calculate that KPI, the data sits in 10 different systems. So what we would then do is kind of a data exercise to create a one source of truth, where we then bring those sources in a kind of in a cloud, in an Azure layer or something like that together to be able to calculate those KPIs. If the data, so then the next two problems are the data is not good enough, or the data doesn't exist, right? And for the data quality exercise, we then do the exercise where we try and establish some governance around the data going forward, but then also do the cleaning exercise for the data that's historic, in order to have some traction that is more or less correct, right? Sometimes it works out, sometimes not. So the data cleaning exercise is one thing. And then if the data haven't been captured, like for instance, at all, then we implement processes of capturing the data. And of course, then it takes some months to actually get some reporting. But that is, I would say, the second step. So yeah, that reporting topic is, I think, the absolutely first step. And I just mentioned a couple of pain points around it. And why it's important, because that forms the whole basis for then future value creation, right? And that's why we call it data-driven, is that we do not produce a strategy without actually understanding the performance and where the drivers of the business sit currently and where they're coming from, right? Because if you create a strategy for the next few years without having understood, well, which clients, which products, which channels have been causing your performance or underperformance of the business, then whatever strategy you put together might be like a kind of a theoretical exercise. And so that's why, and I think that's the data-driven part of it, is that we anchor it in kind of really capturing the as is at a granular level, right? So granular, usually, if it's a retail business, you can go to SKU kind of, right, as an individual product or barcode. If it's a software business, it's usually a customer product view, right? So then you can look at trends, which is subscription versus not, etc., and get those ARR trends, right? So, and I think that's the data-driven starting point. And after that, we see where it's coming from, right? Where the performance, what are the drivers of the performance? And based on that, we can then define kind of a plan for the key things that will matter for an eventual EBITDA uplift or revenue uplift or growth, however you want to define it, right? And the next step is then forming, on the basis of the status quo, specific initiatives that would lead to a kind of a top line growth, for instance. So we focus quite a bit on top line topics. So it's more around sales, marketing, customer journey, pricing, etc. Right? So, and if you see, for instance, in the taking kind of the status quo, that your pricing was all over, some customers you were pricing X, some Y, etc., and there's no specific reason for it, then you might do something about the pricing strategy, right? If you actually haven't captured the full cycle of the customer, if it's a customer journey topic, right? Sometimes we see, okay, we actually only capture data for one part of the customer journey, and then the rest of the customer journey is kind of not captured. So it's a missed revenue opportunity. And in order to be able to capture that revenue opportunity, you need to capture the full customer life cycle, right? So so those things, it's then a little bit more of more specific to the business, right? But things around top line is something we do a lot in terms of that data-driven topic, because then you can kind of leverage that data to then form initiatives for the top line. What we now do more and more now as well is kind of initiatives on the efficiency side. So that's more kind of operational side. So things like voice AI topics or customer service or AI agents for those kind of, I'd call it more operational efficiency topics. This is also something we do. And yeah, same story. The reason why we do it, it comes from the data, right? It's where we see some things either miss the full journey, right? We don't fully understand the full kind of cycle of a customer. And in order to capture that, you need to create some initiatives to be able to capture it. Or where we actually have the transparency that certain, that the performance of certain channels performs better. So we then can take some learnings from that and apply it to for instance, other channels in a way that where it's transferable. So it's kind of capturing all the growth initiatives that we do in that initial kind of full transparency exercise, which is the data-driven reporting, we call it. And and I think there's no magic to it. I think it's more our secret sauces, I think, is that we have the capabilities to do the data analytics topics at the start of it, and we have the engineering capabilities to do the implementation of the topics that we find are then helpful for the growth. And I think doing that full cycle from kind of data-driven assessment of what's needed to then executing on those initiatives is what really makes us, I think, unique, because not everyone has a software team that can actually implement those things in addition to the strategy bit. And I think that's why, and this is what I found. One of the topics also, I came to DevelopX where I was like, okay, we actually can help our clients with with strategy, but also with the execution as a true sparring partner, because we have the capabilities and we've done it before ourselves. So we've built businesses. So we will not just advise. We have the expertise of having done so. And so that makes it interesting. I'm coming back to my interesting point, and to kind of help funders build their growth stories. And this is what we kind of want to stand for, right? So we want to help people build growth stories from the start to the end, so also supporting them throughout the holding periods, and then helping them position their assets for exit, because that's the fun thing to do. And I think we have the capabilities, network, and the mindset of doing that.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. I have one final question, and you answered it pretty thoroughly earlier on exit readiness, but I'd like if you could summarize and give one practical tip for business owners wanting to position their company for a strong sale outcome right now. What would it be?
That's a good question. I already give you many points, but I think stay curious and do it early. The curiosity point is around the AI topics, right? Because you can't position something for an exit where you are not asking the questions to yourselves first before the investors ask them, right? So I would say, since I mentioned many points already, stay curious and get onto it early would be the 2 points.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much, Dan. A lot of good insights today. If listeners enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, where can they find you? Where's the best place to learn more?
Good question. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, so happy to connect with everyone on LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks for coming on today, Diana. It was a great conversation.
Thanks, Pete. Have a great day.
Exit algorithms. Scale smarter. Sell stronger.